Pontius Pilate is a name almost every Christian has heard, yet very few people stop to ask who he really was. When his name appears in the story of Jesus, it often comes in a moment of tension, judgment, and sorrow. He is remembered as the Roman governor who stood before Jesus and faced a decision that would echo through history. But before that moment, Pilate was a man living inside the powerful and often difficult world of the Roman Empire. He was not a king, he was not a religious leader, he was a Roman official whose position gave him authority over the people of Judea. His responsibility was to maintain order and represent Roman power in a land filled with religious devotion, political tension, and deep hopes for freedom. Imagine standing where Pilate stood. You have authority, but you also have pressure. You must keep peace, satisfy those above you, and deal with people whose beliefs and expectations are very different from your own. Then, into this complicated world, Jesus is brought before you. Pilate would have to look at this man and decide what to do with him. That moment is what made his name unforgettable. Yet there is something deeply human about Pilate's story. He was faced with a decision, and decisions often reveal what matters most inside a person. Sometimes the hardest choices are not between something obviously right and obviously wrong. Sometimes they come when fear, pressure, responsibility, and conscience all speak at once. Pilate's story invites us to look beyond the title of governor and see the man standing behind it. Who was he before Jesus entered his courtroom? What kind of world shaped him? And why did this Roman official become connected forever with one of the most important moments in the story of Jesus? To understand that moment, we first need to understand the man himself. Pontius Pilate lived in a world where power was closely connected with control, and his position as governor placed him directly inside that system. Judea was under Roman authority, but the people living there had their own religious traditions, laws, and deep sense of identity. For them, faith was not simply a private belief. It shaped everyday life, community, worship, and the way they understood their relationship with God. Rome, however, was concerned with stability. A governor needed to prevent unrest, protect Roman interests, and keep the region under control. This created a difficult environment for someone like Pilate. He had authority, but authority could quickly become fragile when people felt that their beliefs or dignity were being threatened. Pilate, therefore, had to navigate between Roman expectations and the concerns of the people he governed. Every public disturbance could become a serious problem. Every political accusation could carry consequences. Every decision had the potential to create greater tension. This background helps us understand why the arrival of Jesus would become such a significant moment for Pilate. Jesus did not enter Pilate's world as a Roman official or military commander. He came as a teacher whose message reached deeply into the hearts of ordinary people. His presence challenged expectations and raised questions about authority, truth, and the kingdom of God. Eventually, Jesus was brought before Pilate, and the governor found himself facing a situation unlike the ordinary disputes he had dealt with. There was a man before him who had been accused, yet Pilate had to determine what kind of threat, if any, Jesus actually represented. The atmosphere surrounding that encounter was already heavy with pressure. Pilate was not simply making a private decision. He was standing at the meeting point of Roman authority, religious concerns, public expectation, and the mysterious presence of Jesus. And soon, Pilate would have to ask a question that reaches far beyond his own courtroom. What should be done with this man? The moment Jesus was brought before Pontius Pilate, the governor faced a situation that was far more complicated than a simple accusation. Jesus had been brought to him by those who wanted a judgment, but Pilate had to determine what kind of case stood before him. As he looked at Jesus, he was not simply looking at another prisoner. He was looking at a man surrounded by powerful accusations. Yet there was something different about the way Jesus carried himself. He did not appear like someone desperately fighting for his life. He did not respond with the kind of fear or aggression that might have been expected from someone facing serious consequences. Instead, there was a quietness surrounding him. For Pilate, that silence may have made the situation even more difficult. A governor was accustomed to people defending themselves, arguing their innocence, or trying to influence the outcome. Jesus seemed different. The more Pilate encountered him, the more difficult it became to treat the matter as an ordinary political dispute. Yet pressure was building around him. The people were demanding a decision, and Pilate had to consider the consequences of whatever he chose. This is where the story becomes deeply personal. Pilate had authority, but authority does not always make a decision easier. Sometimes the greater the power a person possesses, the heavier the responsibility becomes. Pilate was standing between what he understood and what the crowd demanded. He had to decide whether to release Jesus or allow the situation to move toward a terrible outcome. The question was no longer simply about Roman law or public order. It was becoming a question of conscience. Pilate could hear the voices around him, but he also had to face the truth of what stood directly before him. Jesus remained calm while others demanded action, and in that contrast the governor's inner struggle became clearer. Pilate had entered the encounter believing he was the one holding authority, but as the moment unfolded, something unexpected happened. The prisoner standing before him seemed to expose the weakness of the man who believed he was in control. Pilate now stood at the center of a decision that would become impossible to forget. He had encountered Jesus, questioned him, and faced the growing pressure surrounding the case. Yet the deeper he moved into that moment, the harder it became to treat Jesus as simply another prisoner. Pilate had to deal with the demands of the crowd, the expectations of those who wanted Jesus condemned, and the responsibility attached to his own position. But beneath all of that was another question, quieter and more personal. What did Pilate himself believe about the man standing before him? The pressure around him continued to rise, and eventually Pilate gave in to the demand for Jesus to be crucified. That decision placed Pilate permanently within the story of Jesus. He may have possessed the authority to make the judgment, but the event would not end when the judgment was spoken. History would remember his name because of what happened in that moment. There is something sobering about this. Pilate had a choice before him, and his choice reminds us that pressure can influence a person even when the truth is standing directly in front of them. We often imagine that having authority means having complete freedom, but Pilate's story shows something different. Fear of consequences, concern about public reaction, and the desire to preserve order can all become powerful forces. The governor, who seemed to hold the power of judgment, was also being influenced by the world around him. Jesus, meanwhile, remained at the center of the storm with a quiet strength. Pilate's decision would lead Jesus toward the crucifixion, but it would also leave a question hanging over Pilate himself. What happens to a person after making a decision that becomes part of history? And what became of the Roman governor after Jesus was taken away? The story of Pilate does not simply end with the judgment. His name continued beyond that courtroom, carrying the weight of the moment when he stood before Jesus and chose what history would never allow him to forget. After Jesus was taken away, Pontius Pilate's place in history was forever changed. He had entered the story as a Roman governor responsible for maintaining order, but he would be remembered for a decision connected to the crucifixion of Jesus. His name would continue through generations, not because of a great victory or achievement, but because of the moment when he stood before Jesus and made a choice under tremendous pressure. The details of what happened to Pilate afterward are not as clear as the story of his encounter with Jesus, and that uncertainty itself reminds us how little we truly know about the private life of this powerful Roman official. Yet the significance of Pilate's story does not depend on knowing every detail of his later life. His importance comes from the decision he faced. Pilate represents a person standing between pressure and conscience, authority and fear, responsibility and personal choice. He had the position to make a judgment, but his story shows that power does not automatically give someone courage. Sometimes a person can have authority over others while still struggling to control the fears within themselves. That is what makes Pilate's encounter with Jesus so deeply human. He was not simply a historical figure standing in an ancient courtroom. He was a man confronted with a moment that demanded a decision, and when we look at his story today, perhaps the most important question is not only what Pilate did, but what his story asks of us. Every person eventually faces moments when truth becomes uncomfortable, when pressure becomes strong, and when the easier choice may not be the better one. Pilate's story quietly reminds us that our choices can reveal who we truly are. His name remains connected to Jesus because of one unforgettable encounter. And perhaps that is the lasting lesson. When truth stands before us, we cannot always control the voices around us, but we are still responsible for the choices we make.